Once again, I'd like to thank Bhante here for the opportunity. Today, I wanted to give a short Dhamma talk on Samavayama. Samavayama is the sixth step in the Noble Eightfold Path. And in my experience, this factor of the path kind of gets overlooked. And when it gets explained, it's usually about like just striving, kind of like just putting effort. But when we look at what the Buddha says in the suttas, he explains to us that this step, this factor, is divided into 4 parts: samvara, pahana, bhavana, anurakkhana. So also samavayama is known as the Chattaripatthana, the 4 strivings. First one, samvara. Samvara is a very important practice. Samvara means to restrain or protect. Actually, one of the first trainings that a bhikkhu has to undergo in the beginning of their training is called Indriya Samvara. Indriya means the senses, typically the 5 senses: seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, listening. Samvara, to protect our senses. Why? The Buddha says that we need to protect the mind from unwholesome states arising in the mind when they're not present. Right? So our mind gets stimulated or reacts to different experiences, different stimulus from the environment. Something might come in contact with our eye, with our ear, with our nose, with our mouth, and with our body. And due to that contact, we get a pleasant or unpleasant feeling, and that either leads to desiring it or having an aversion, wanting it, clinging to it, attaching to it, or hating it and wanting to get rid of it and push it away. So in order to protect our mind from being disturbed, from being perturbed by things in the environment that might cause or condition an unwholesome state in our mind, we need to be very vigilant when it comes to our senses. We need to protect our senses from those things which might trigger an unwholesome state in our mind. That is the first training, samvara. So I think this is a very important training for our time because of technology, social media, entertainment. It is so easy for us to be triggered by looking at something or listening to something. I can imagine it being more difficult in an agrarian society, when some small little village today, when you don't have that much access to a lot of information. Maybe only seeing your neighbor or your one of your family members might trigger you, might bother you. But nowadays it's so easy to get distracted and have unwholesome states, greed, hatred, delusion arise in the mind, because we carry it in our pockets all the time. So we need to be very careful about what we pay attention to, what we see, what we listen, what we smell, what we taste, what we touch. This is actually the first step in samadhi training, because samavayama, right effort, is the first of the steps of samadhi in the Noble Eightfold Path, followed by samasati, right mindfulness, and samma samadhi, right concentration. So usually the Eightfold Path is divided into 3 parts: wisdom, morality or behavior, and samadhi, meditation or concentration. And the first step is first to practice samvara, to protect your senses. Second step, pahana. Pahana, the Buddha says, is that when an unwholesome state does arise in the mind, you get rid of it, you abandon it, you eliminate it, you throw it away. So here, the Buddha offers us many ways to eliminate an unwholesome state. There is a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya called the Vitakka Santana Sutta. Vitakka means thought or state of mind. Santana means to calm, the discourse on calming thoughts. And here the Buddha says, when an unwholesome thought arises in the mind, one replaces it with a wholesome thought. So we don't allow ourselves to entertain, to fester, to ruminate, to fantasize on these unwholesome, unskillful states. As soon as we recognize an unwholesome, unskillful state, we try to get rid of it by replacing it with a wholesome state. The Buddha also gives us 4 other ways to do it, but I don't want to go through that whole discourse. I just want to explain the principle of elimination, getting rid of this unwholesome state. The Buddha also gives a very important example to what degree we should want to eliminate unwholesome states when they arise in the mind. Because, we might indulge in unwholesome states. Maybe our boss or our superior does something that we don't agree with, and we might have some fantasy about revenge or getting back at them or them being hurt. And we think, well, that's fine because I'm not really doing anything. Or we might have some sort of sexual fantasies about someone else's partner or some celebrity on TV. And well, that's fine because I'm not actually doing it. But the Buddha taught us that there's 3 types of kamma, 3 types of intentional actions: mental, verbal, and bodily. So even just entertaining those thoughts, you're already creating unskillful, unwholesome karma. So the Buddha said we need to think about these thoughts like a beautiful person in the prime of their life, a person of noble standing, a very proud person, a very wealthy person, educated person, who's covered in jewelry and beautiful scents. And imagine if someone were to put the dead carcass of an animal on that person. How would that person feel upon noticing that they have a dead carcass of an animal on their body? Well, that person would freak out and throw it away right away because they don't want it. So in a similar way, when an unwholesome state arises in the mind, we need to see the danger in it and not entertain it and replace it with the wholesome state. For example, if you either fear hatred or fear, you can replace it with metta, loving kindness. If you feel cruelty or violence in the mind, you can replace it with karuna, compassion. If you feel a bit jealous or resentful, you can replace it with mudita, altruistic joy. Right? And there's a long list of ways that we can do this. That's the second step in the meditation training. The third step is the one which we are all very familiar with, bhavana. Bhavana means meditation, to cultivate, to develop. Here the Buddha says, when there isn't a wholesome state present in the mind, one makes an effort to bring about a wholesome state in the mind. And usually when the Buddha talks about this in the suttas, he talks about the sattabojjhanga, the 7 factors of awakening. First one being sati, mindfulness. So when there isn't either a unwholesome state, when the mind is just kind of blank, not really doing anything, we need to make an effort. We need to strive to bring about a wholesome state in the mind, starting with sati, mindfulness. Then going to dhamma vichaya, investigation of phenomena or states, which just means noticing if something is wholesome or unwholesome. Then we make an effort, we strive to bring about vidya, energy, strength in the practice, mental strength. Then we make an effort to bring piti, joy in the mind. We make an effort then to bring passaddhi, which means relaxation or tranquility. Then we make an effort to bring about samadhi, usually translated as concentration. And then we make an effort to bring about upekkha, equanimity. This is bhavana. So there's many different ways to practice bhavana, but the important thing is that no matter which kind of meditative practices we're doing, we are working on developing these 7 factors of awakening. This is the third right effort or right striving. Then finally, we have probably the most difficult one, which is anurakkhana, maintenance, or to continue, to keep it going. So it's not enough to come to a beautiful place like this with beautiful people, very serene, very quiet, very nice, and practice bhavana for 20, 30 minutes once a week. In a similar way that if you wanted to make some, dietary changes or some physical changes in your body through exercise, it wouldn't be enough to just do the routine 20 minutes or 1 hour once a week. You wouldn't get the results that you would expect. Or to learn a language, if you wanted to learn a new language, just practicing 20 minutes once a week, it's going to take a long time, or it may not even happen. So if we want to see results and cultivate these 7 factors of awakening, it's something that we need to continue. Even in the Karaniya Metta Sutta, the Buddha says from the moment that at all times one must be established in sati, mindfulness, at all times. That means from the moment that we wake up to when we go to sleep, whether walking, standing, sitting, or lying down, at all times, developing the first factor of awakening at least, sati, maintaining the practice in everything that we do. It's very difficult, but it is possible. So, samavayama means right effort. It's also known as the chataripatana, which means the 4 strivings. First one is samvara, to protect your senses, indriya samvara. Second is pahana, to eliminate. We eliminate an unwholesome thought or state in the mind by replacing it with a wholesome state. The third one is bhavana, to meditate. We develop the 7 factors of awakening. Mostly we do this through the practice of satipatthana, anapanasati. And then we have anurakkhana, which means to keep it going, keep this practice going, keep developing wholesome states as much as possible all the time. So if you notice here, we actually have the 2 following steps included within this practice. The development of the Satabhojanga is samasati, which is the practice of satipatthana. The 7th step in the Noble Eightfold Path is included within the 6th step. Sama samadhi, concentration or jhana, is also included in here because we have the development of the 7 factors of awakening. We have samadhi and upekkha, which are also found in sama samadhi. So when we come at this practice of meditation, and when we try to understand it through this lens of the Eightfold Path, we need to have a more integrated view of meditation. Not that focusing on sama sati, a mindfulness practice or a concentrative practice, but really see that all these things are just different dimensions, and different perspective, different angles of the same practice. And if you want to develop one of these, you need to develop all of them together. And even just to develop right effort, samavayama, first you need to also work on your behavior. Samavacha, samakamanta, sama ajiva, right speech, right actions, and right behavior. If we're not mindful of our behavior, then when we meditate, all those unwholesome actions of the past and words and thoughts will arise in the mind and disturb us. So we need to change our behavior in order for when we sit down to do meditation, it's a lot easier to calm the mind and get into a good meditation and not be perturbed about all the things that we feel remorseful or guilty or shameful about in the past. And that also depends on wisdom. To practice right effort, samavayama, we need to develop our wisdom, which is samaditi and samasankappa. Right understanding means basically most of the time, there's many ways to talk about it, but the Buddha says the Four Noble Truths is one way of understanding, having right understanding, sammaditi. And samma sankappa is like the right motivation or right way to think, which means having a motivation or a way of thinking which focuses on renunciation, we can say letting go, loving kindness, benevolence, and non-violence, compassion. So when we want to develop our meditation practice, we need to look at all these other previous steps um, in the Noble Eightfold Path in order to be able to develop our meditative practice, in order to be able to develop right effort, uh, in order to be able to change our behavior and our understanding and our way of thinking. So I just kind of wanted to share with you this basic outline and wanted actually to leave a lot more time for questions and answers, because you know what I told you is something that you can just Google and find out for yourself. I mean, that's not a much benefit, but I think there's more benefit in, you know, looking at the nuances, or like, how do I do this in my actual meditation or in my everyday life? Or maybe you can share some of your struggles, and maybe I have some experience with those struggles too, and I can tell you how to apply this right effort into your daily life. So Bhante, I don't know if that's okay if we can move on to that part now.
Pali chanting, but for those of you who don't know Pali, Ajahn Kovila's translated sadhu as yeah, yeah, yeah. That was great. So, way to go. So, thank you, Bhante. We do have a chance now for people to speak or bring up anything they'd like to discuss or talk about. On the live stream, you can type in your questions or bring them up in the chat, and others can raise their hand, and let us just run a mic over to you or mindfully quickly walk a mic over to you. And if you would say your name before you speak, that would be great. I have a first question, Bhante. Could you just speak a bit about, I know you get asked this often, but your path into robes?
Bhante. So um, I came across Buddhism at a very early age. I grew up in the very diverse neighborhood to this day of Koreatown in downtown Los Angeles, and uh, you know, when I walk down the street, even to this day, you know, most uh, most of the businesses are Asian owned, and that was always there around me, and also my parents. Although they were both Latinos, they were very always interested in Asian culture. And actually, the first school I ever went to was a Korean daycare. I was the only non-Korean. I didn't know at that time. But then when I looked at the class picture, I was like, oh, someone's different here. And it was me. Uh, so then, you know, growing up in that area and near the Hollywood area, because then a couple years later we moved to Hollywood. Um, I had a lot of friends, like Thai friends, Vietnamese friends, and I had some curiosity, and I would ask them about Buddhism. But you know, uh, new generation to America doesn't really know that much about their tradition, and they would say, "Oh, you know, we just go like we light candles and we give incense for our ancestors, and that's Buddhism." And I was like, "Oh, so you just like do this ritual and that's it? You know, what did the Buddha teach? Go get a book or something. You know, like you'll find out." And I was like, "Okay." But then when I got into high school, I started reading a lot of studying like the Greek philosophers, and then I was like, well, you know, maybe the East has something to offer too. So then I started picking up some Buddhist philosophy books, Buddhist books, and the first one I read was "The Joy of Living and Dying in Peace" by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and it was kind of just like a good summary or introduction to the Eightfold Path. And then I was like, ah, yes, that's what I've been looking for, but I was still too immature to actually follow through. It was like, oh, it sounds nice, but to do it, I wasn't ready. And then actually in high school, my high school sweetheart, she was a Vietnamese Buddhist too. So I learned something about Buddhism through her family, but her family also was mostly focused on just like, going to the temple and giving money and offering incense and lighting candles, and there wasn't anything else really to it. But then I was when I had joined the Air Force right before I left to basic training, I went to a Thai temple, Wat Thai, in LA, and then I tried to talk to the monks there, but nobody knew English. So they gave me a book about the Eightfold Path again. There's like around 30 monks there all the time, so it's not like like a small temple. It's a big temple, and still no one knew any English, or there wasn't nobody that knew was there. So then I went again the following week, and again like no one could talk to me, and they didn't have any programs either. So then I just kept studying the book, and I left to basic training. So then I kept reading Buddhist books for like the next 8 years, and finally I said, man, like enough's enough. Like I just gotta find a way. I gotta find my own way. So I went on to Google, and I put like Buddhist temples, and then I found one where they said they had an English program, and it was this little house actually around the corner in the San Fernando Valley, because I moved to the valley later, San Fernando Valley in LA, and I went there and I knocked on the door and I said, "Oh, you have a Friday meditation program?" They said, "Yes, 7 o'clock," and then they closed the door. And I was like, "Man, like this is not working out for me again. Like it's so hard." But I showed up. I showed up, and then when I showed up there, I was surprised to see that half of the people there, like 6 to 8 people, were all like middle age or older Latinos, men and women. And I was like, "Oh wow, this is very different." And there was no Asian people besides the monks. And so I kind of just stayed there. And after like 2 or 3 months, my future teacher Bhante Punaji showed up, and I showed up there for meditation, but I didn't know that there was gonna be a talk, and they told me to stay. And my teacher Bhante Punaji, he was very um, like academic, and then the first Dhamma talk he gave, it just went over my head, and I was like, oh wow, that's too much. And then the second time I went, this one Latina woman who's like very been going to the temple for over 25 years, she asked a question like, so what is the best thing we can do to kind of like help us practice this? What can we do to get out of this samsara and dukkha? What's your advice? And then my teacher said, well, the fastest or the easiest way to do it, if you really want to, is to take up robes to become a monk. And then something clicked in my head at that time. I still wasn't ready, but I remember hearing that and saying, yeah, like that makes sense. But to be honest, at that time I was living my best life. Like I was having a lot of fun. I wasn't a very spiritual person. I was of the world, and so I wasn't ready. But I had got this. Then I was about to be sent on my third deployment to Afghanistan, and then I said, you know what? How about I practice this Dhamma in Afghanistan and see what happens? Everything, and try to live like a monk too. So I also practiced, like brahmacharya while I was out there too. And because you might think, well, you can't do those things. A lot of things are happening over there that you wouldn't think are happening. Um, so people started noticing over there too that I had changed, and I felt different too. And then when I came back, I said, you know what? This Dhamma really helped me those 6 months I was there in Afghanistan, and like I would really want to go deeper. So then I went on a meditation retreat, and then I had a really good retreat, like really amazing. And actually, I didn't want to leave it, but I had already had a planned a trip with my military friends to go to Spain for 2.5 weeks, and I know they wouldn't be happy if I didn't go with them. So I ended up going with them. I came back, and then I went to my temple and I asked for ordination, and the monks just laughed. Then I was like, "Oh, I want to become a monk." Very nice. And then see you later. And Then the next Friday, I told them, no, I was serious. Like, I want to become a monk. They're like, oh, okay, okay, you keep studying. Just study, study, study. And then after 3 months, finally, they said, okay, we're going to like kind of see and like what you're doing and kind of check on you for the next couple months to see if you're a good candidate to be a monk. Then almost about like 9 months from when I first asked them, I was giving a ride to one of the monks to our meditation center and the chief monk, and he said, "You can come and stay with us now." Just like out of nowhere, like we weren't talking the whole way. He just said that, and then we kept driving. He didn't say anything else. So then I had to like get out of the military. I had to get rid of my car. I had to sell my house. I had to break up with my girlfriend. I had to do all these things. She was very supportive though. She never said like anything to stop or don't do it. And then I told her like, would you want me to stay? And she says, no, you go. Yeah, that's what you want to do. I don't want to be the one that holds you back. So I thank her for that, for being very supportive. And although she cried when she was telling me this, but she was very supportive. My mom also cried. She went to my ordination, Samanera ordination. And, she's a traditional Mexican Catholic woman. She didn't know what's going on, but she started crying. And then when I saw her cry, I started to cry too. But I was bowing so people couldn't see, and my face was down. So it's easier for me to cry. Um, and then I was 3 years of Samanera at that temple, and then in 2018 I went to Sri Lanka and got ordained at Maharagama Bhikkhu Training Center. By my teacher, also my teacher Bhante Puniji was there, and we talked for like 2 hours, and then 3 days later he passed away in Sri Lanka on the full moon of the beginning of the rains retreat. Yeah, on that full moon he passed that night in his sleep. Um, and then he told me something that day. He says, "You know what? Um, in his experience, he said the best way to kind of like throw a large net in the West to get people to kind of like begin to understand what Buddhism is about is we need to speak their language." And he grew up speaking English, so he wasn't talking about English, although he was Sri Lankan. He says like according to the what they value, and he says, well, they value like science a lot, so we need to speak to them in that way as a bridge uh, for them to understand. So he says you should like uh, study psychology. And I was already done with school. I didn't want to go back to school, but since he passed away, then I said, well, like that was the last thing he told me. So then, like 2 or 3 months later, I signed up for a master's degree in counseling psychology. And then I was lucky enough that when I started there, they also started doing research into mindfulness. So I've been doing over a year and a half qualitative research, like introducing mindfulness into graduate studies and undergraduate studies, and also introducing mindfulness electives for clinicians to help them also, for their own self care. So yeah, that's basically like in a nutshell the short version of my story, Bante.
We have one question from Robert. Bhante, how can I approach sport, and more specifically competitive sport, in a way that is more wholesome?
Yeah, that's difficult because it's set up in like this dichotomous way, right? Where there's winners and there's losers. And I mean, there's fame that also plays into it, there's wealth that plays into it. There's so many factors. I don't think there's one thing that I can say that can, give you a very clear way to approach it. But, just try to do the best that you can do in every moment. Um, Try to definitely practice mindfulness and practice metta, loving kindness and compassion. Um, but like if I wanted to give you like some extreme advice, like very very extreme advice, would be to do something else, right? Just do something else. It might be difficult, like sometimes people come to me, especially with a lot of relationship problems, and then I'm like, well, have you considered just breaking up? Oh, that's like the worst thing, right? Like, well, you don't seem very happy, you know, like why are you going to stay in a place that's not good for you, right? So even the Buddha told us, right, like in right livelihood, not to sell poisons or weapons or do things that harm others. And but sometimes we forget if there's some about ourselves, if our job or our hobbies are harming ourselves. If something's harming us, then we also need to avoid it, right? So they, you know, maybe if you're like playing volleyball or tennis, you know, you're not harming yourself to that degree, but you should consider, you know, where are you at in your life right now, and where's your Dhamma practice at right now, and where do you want to take it right now, and what's your ultimate goal in this life or in the future. So you just kind of have to look at your own life and like reassess your values. What do you want out of this life? What do you want out of this moment? And then try to do the best you can to help you achieve that goal. And that's going to look different for every person because there's so many factors that play into everyone's life. There really isn't something that we can say like, well, just do this, you know, like, oh, like we do for meditation, right? If you feel fear, oh, practice loving kindness. It's very simple. But for something like this, I think it's so many layers. There's so many layers that are there that it would require like a one-on-one talk for like an hour to really get deep and give you a good answer, not just, you know, throw something out there that someone else, they might not work for someone else that's in a similar situation.
Hi, Moffat. Thank you so much for the talk. I particularly got something out of the idea of trying to imagine myself being dignified and having a carcass attached, and the wisdom of seeing it as a burden or a carcass that I could then throw off. I think for me, I pictured the carcass as sort of fear, fear of the future, fear of security, and was wondering if you had more thoughts on, like, if you see the wisdom of, you know, how it's not helping you to feel this, how to keep it from, you know, it's like reattaching it to self all the time. And I love that. Like, how do you throw it off? But in my real life, it keeps reappearing.
Yeah, I think first we need to kind of see what the results of holding onto that are, you know? We kind of be like, we kind of see like, well, if I keep this, what's going to happen to me, to others, and to me and others? And once you wisely consider this and you see that it leads to unwholesomeness, then that urge or that motivation to get rid of it is like automatic, right? Like if I don't know, like if you find some poop on you, right? Like you don't have to be like, oh, should I take it off or not? You just take it off, right? So in a similar way, once you recognize kind of like the dirtiness of the unwholesome act, like how it can lead to your suffering and the suffering of others, it's just like intuitive, like right, like that sense of like self-compassion and compassion towards others just comes up in a very fierce way, and you just reject it. So in the beginning, it does take us to be mindful of what's actually happening and then be able to discern if it's wholesome or unwholesome. But then usually once we see it as unwholesome, then it's easy to get rid of it. You know, like anything, like if you touch fire, it burns you. You don't think about it. You just pull your hand away. But we need to first wisely consider it and pay attention to it. But I think that's the difficult thing because many of us don't want to look at ourselves and our patterns and our thoughts, and we kind of take them for granted, especially if our culture supports it. So we don't ever analyze our words, our actions, our behaviors, and all these other things. But if we do take time to analyze everything, every single aspect of our life, we'll be able to discern what's good or not.
I was just gonna say, I think that some part of me thinks the fear is what's going to protect me. So it's not that I don't see the burden of it. I see that, okay, well, it's a necessary carcass because then I'll be safe if I'm afraid. But I appreciate the encouragement to look more clearly at that and see, is that true?
Yeah, so you know, most of the things that we do were useful for us at some point. These are strategies that we learned. So maybe in the past it was a good way to, or the best that you could do at that time. But now you have so much more experience and different tools. So that might not be the best tool for the new project that you're working on, that fear.
Just on that same note of what Bhante is saying, one very useful technique is to, so many of those patterns got developed when we were children to survive. And if you can just imagine inviting that child in, like that little Moffat, and you just really sincerely thanking her for helping you get through the times you needed to, and then say, I have a different way of dealing with this now, and kind of letting them just rest. I think that visualization can be really helpful. Another helpful thing to remember is Ajahn Chah said about 80% of the practice is knowing we should let go of something and not being able to. So it's just, this takes a while. These are such old habits. And, as with all the leaf blowers of the world, when these things come into your mind, it's one thing to kind of shy away from them. It's another thing to imagine that your consciousness is expanding to include it as well. And to understand that, like, a lot of loving kindness is just really being able to feel that sense of dukkha, of pain internally. And with something like fear or anger, often it's the impulses to spread metta outwards, whereas often the real manifestation of metta is to really have compassion for yourself and the pain of how painful anger is. Like, compassion towards yourself is where it needs to go appropriately. And the final thing, which is partly what Bhante is saying as well, I think, around some of the sports things, is sometimes you do get into one of those cycles where you just know you need to let go of something. And you keep kind of negotiating with yourself. And we do have a tool in the Buddhist tool belt called adhitthana, which means determination. And that's where you just say, it's kind of the sword of wisdom, where you just say, enough is enough. I'm not going to drink anymore. I'm not going to do this. And I think I've mentioned this before, but some people will write a check to the political party they hate and give it to a friend, and say that if I break this adhitthana, you need to mail the check. So it's a useful thing as well.
Thank you, Bhante. I've got a question. In that space where, let's say, anger arises, and you're saying eventually, or at some point, ideally sooner than later, replace it with something like metta. But in that space between when it has arisen and the metta, is there, what's kind of the right way to go about it? Because I find a lot of benefit from, contemplating why it has arisen, like maybe watching its impermanent nature. And then once I realize that it's happening in the mind, then there's a recognition that, metta is a better alternative. So is there a value in that kind of contemplation, given that it has arisen, or should I immediately try to replace it with metta?
So in order to recognize that even anger has arisen, there has to be a level of mindfulness, right? So right there, we already have the practice of satipatthana already beginning. And then to see that anger is unskillful, unwholesome, then you have the second factor of the 7 factors of awakening, which is investigation of Dhamma, right? And then in that second factor, when you recognize that this is unwholesome, then you would try to replace it with a wholesome state, right? So there is a space. There is that space, from when it arises to when you're able to discern its unwholesomeness, right? So in that space, we need to practice the highest austerities, or the hardest practice of all. The Buddha said, "Kanti paramam tapotiti kani banam paramam vadati Buddha." Like patience and tolerance are the highest practices, or the highest austerities, right? So this practice of replacing an unwholesome state with a wholesome one is not a practice of aversion, where you try to run away from it. it's a practice of not letting your train of thought be taken in by that thought, by that state of mind, right? So you see you're going down that road and you're like, well, my mindfulness is not enough. Just being mindful of it is not enough. I've been sitting here for, 2 or 3 minutes just thinking about like murdering my neighbor or something like that, right? So mindfulness is a neutral state of mind. We can use it for good or for bad. So then when you notice that the mindfulness on its own is not powerful, then you have to kind of do something about it and not just sit with anger or sadness for like an hour in a row. Like that's like self-mortification. Like what Buddha said, we had to avoid the two extremes of indulgence and mortification. And in meditation, we kind of there's this kind of macho attitude sometimes about it, right? Like with physical pain or with emotional disturbances or mental disturbances, we're like, well, I just gotta tough it out, and just be like, no, 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 like be nice. Practice the loving kindness towards yourself. So when you do see, some anger or sadness or some unwholesome state come up, and during your mindfulness practice, there comes to a place where you're reaching your threshold, and at that time, it'd be very skillful to into like a loving kindness practice. But it's definitely not like a reactionary practice or a practice of aversion. As soon as something comes up, you try to run away. We need to fully comprehend it, see it, discern whether it's wholesome or unwholesome, and then replace it. So we do need to have some patience and tolerance, kind of to know how it arose, right? That's the important thing. We need to know what are the causes and conditions for anger to arise. What are the causes and conditions for sadness to arise? And we only get that if we're able to stay with it for a bit.
Hello, my name is Hiram. Thank you, Bhante, for coming and giving that Dhamma talk. Um, in your introduction, I heard you have a Latino outreach. Um, and I would imagine some young people come and ask questions. So first I'll give a little dialogue and then the question afterwards. So there's I hate to bring this up. There's a Netflix story, Netflix, that has Game of Thrones. There was a terrible ending, and me and my kid were looking at it, and she was like, "Oh, that sucks. That was 8 seasons, and it wasn't a great ending." And I was like, "That's a great ending because that's how life is. You know, good things, bad things happen, and then you live life on." So my question is, how do you relate to younger people and bringing them into Buddhism and accepting cause and conditions, and then how to live life, accepting those conditions?
Yeah, that last part is the most difficult one. How to bring people into the Dhamma is a little bit easier. So one thing that I noticed, at least in LA with most of the monasteries, was that all the monks stay inside. They never go outside. And when they do, they're in a car. So nobody sees them. Like monks are invisible. And Southern California has the largest population of Buddhists and the most Buddhist temples in Southern California than in all the country. But it's like they're not around. So I decided, you know what? I'm just going to walk everywhere. And I'm on public transportation. I take the bus, I take the train. I'm always walking places. And then when new people who are interested in Buddhism want to meet up with me, I try to meet them at a coffee shop, or something like that, like in a neutral space where they feel more comfortable, or or somewhere like in a park or a train station. I try to meet people just like where they're at, not just like psychologically, but actually physically. I'll try to meet you where you're at, and I think that's a good way because, there's so many barriers. One is like a cultural, ethnic barrier. There's the religious barrier, right? Like, so there's a lot of barriers coming into the Dhamma. And there's a lot of barriers on the other side, like from being from a Latino family, a lot of like stigma about like, changing religions, or even like looking at other religions, or doing even like yoga or any kind of like meditation. Like there's a lot of stigma and taboo about it. So you kind of have to like bring it down to earth and meet them where they're at. And actually most of my work is just like unexpected. Like some people will come up to me on the train and they'll be like, "Hey man, like you a real Buddhist monk or what?" You know? And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a real Buddhist monk." They're like, so, and actually, to be honest, like I would say more than half of the people that interact with me on the streets are like gang members. They're like, "Hey, what's up, homie? Like, what's going on? What are you doing?" Like, and they talk with me. I've had a couple just start crying in front of me because they share their difficult experiences with me. So I think we just gotta. It's just gotta be like a person to person thing. It can't be like, "Oh, I got this awesome thing called Buddhism or meditation to share with you." It's just having that human connection, and then once they see that humanity in you, they're gonna be interested in you. Like, okay, what do you do? Just like you would ask anyone else, like, what do you do for work? Do you have kids? Do you have family? And then once you get to that kind of level, then like once they're that open, it's just easy to share. Just like with anyone else. So I think we just got to make it very normal. And the other part is difficult because I have a little sister, she's 19, and a little brother, and he's 17. And they think, life just always has to be like fun, right? Like if life isn't fun, then things are horrible. Like even neutral is horrible. Like they always have to be on like going places, doing all these things, and sharing everything online. And when things don't go their way, it's very very difficult to kind of tell them that it's going to be okay. And one, because they don't want to hear it. Even they don't even want to hear it. So I think a lot of it is just like being there for them. Just being there for them and just kind of waiting for them to mature. you know because I think as long as we're there for someone, um, there's the opportunity for that person, if they do want to change or improve their life or do something about what's going on, they know where to go. So I think just being available in general to anyone is like the best that we can do. And with young people, especially if you're someone like their parents or someone older, it's very difficult because there's like a power imbalance and they don't want any of that. They want to be on equal ground, and they're like, "Oh, you think I know everything," and stuff like that. So I think it might be more useful if someone similar to their age might talk to them about it, if you can find someone like that. Uh, but yeah, it's very difficult, like even though I'm a Buddhist monk, my sister don't care, right? She still calls me Ricky, and like she don't care about anything. Um, and she'll bring up all the stuff I did in the past too. Well, you used to go to parties and you used to do this and you used to do that. Now it's my turn. So like there's really nothing I can really do. But I noticed that when she does need help, she reaches out to me and she calls me, like for stuff she wouldn't call my mom or her dad for, or other family members. She's very sincere with me, and she's very straight up. Even about the bad things she does, she just tells me straight up. And I'm like, wow, like that feels so good that my sister can trust me like that, that she can just tell me something that she wouldn't feel comfortable telling other people, because she knows I won't tell her like you shouldn't do that or this and that. I'm just like, okay. So I think a lot of it's just being there, and then just kind of letting them work their way through it, which is painful for us too. Like we don't want to see them go through the same things that we did. So it's hard, but again, there we have to practice patience and tolerance, like the Buddha said, which is very difficult.
My name's Adam. This is kind of similar to another question that was asked, but oftentimes when I feel angry or upset with a person, it comes from some feeling of like hurt or betrayal. And I find it really difficult to try to just immediately replace that with metta without some kind of communication or action. And so I guess I'm wondering if there's a place for like communication within that process of like showing loving kindness to the person who may have hurt me by like explaining to them how that hurt me. It also feels like sort of an important piece of compassion to myself in also feeling valid in that hurt. So I guess I'm wondering if there's a place for that, or if you would suggest putting more effort into just the mindfulness of the emotion itself. Thank you.
So yes, there definitely is a place for it, but I'd like to use like a little example here. You know, if this place would to go on fire, the first thing we want to do is turn off the fire and not launch an investigation of like all the causes and conditions that led to the fire. Like that happens after the fire. The firefighters then investigate like, okay, how did the fire happen? Was it electrical? Did someone set it up on purpose? So in the moment where you feel that fire of sadness, resentment, anger, etc., whatever unwholesome state, you need to extinguish it for your own well-being. Once you get that done, then yes, then it's the time to see how. What can you do to protect yourself from it happening in the future? And part of that might be to be able to communicate with other people, right? Like, well, you know, when this happens, I feel this way, right? And then if the person doesn't change their behavior, then it's just time to leave that person, right? If you can, if it's possible for you to, you know, separate yourself from that person. But in the moment, you have to turn off the unwholesomeness. And then once you're in a place, a stable place, then it's time for you to go about all the other ways, you know, that you might that you can handle that situation to feel some sort of like closure about what's going on. But there definitely is a place, and there should always be a place for holding people accountable. And you know, doing something outside is just not like, you know, well, this person robbed me, so I'm just gonna practice loving kindness. You know, like no, like you need to run away if you see someone coming at you, and if they rob you, you need to call the police, and like there's all these things that you need to do, you know. But for when it comes to like your mental self-care, then that's the time that you apply the loving kindness. But that's the, you know, I think we kind of have to, like what I was getting at to earlier in the beginning when I said like a more like integrated practice, you know, like we can't just think about like, well, meditation is going to be the solution for everything, for all life's problems. Formal meditation, you know, we need to kind of look at wisdom, behavior, meditation, and being in a community, having kalyanamitas. The Buddha said that the spiritual path is impossible without kalyanamitas, right? So without having this, you can't even practice the Dhamma. It's not possible, right? So it's very important. So there's so many things. So I think, you know, whatever seems like is the most wholesome thing to you at that time, try that. And then don't be stuck to that, you know, because then the next time that might not be as useful. So we kind of have to have this kind of dynamic practice. We're always ready to pull from the Dhamma, whatever works for us at that time, and not be so rigid about like, well, I'm just Vipassana practicer, so no matter what happens in the world, I'm just going to do Vipassana. Or I'm just a loving kindness metta practitioner. No matter what happens in the world, I'm just going to do metta because I'm loyal to this practice. Like, no, you know, sometimes you got to do other things, and we just got to be very open to that.